eyewitness description of debris landing in and around the man's house. Many people rushed out when they heard this unusual explosion this morning as the space shuttle Columbia broke up just as it was coming in for a landing just after 9 o'clock.
On February 1st, 2003, 7 astronauts burned alive entering Earth's atmosphere. NASA saw the damage 16 days earlier, but told no one. Engineers begged for satellite pictures to check the wing, but NASA didn't try. Some officials even debated whether the crew should know they might die. This wasn't an accident, it was a choice. And the worst part is that NASA had seen this exact problem on 82% of shuttle flights before Columbia. Today, we're revealing what really happened in those final moments. On January 5th, 1972, Richard Nixon sat down for just 45 minutes with NASA's top boss, James Fletcher. That short meeting changed space forever. NASA asked for $15 billion to build something new, a space plane that could go to space and come back over and over again. But Nixon's budget team said no. They only approved $15 billion. That one decision slashed 66% off the plan and forced NASA to give up their dream of building a shuttle that was fully reusable. They had to go with a cheaper version that used disposable parts, like the huge orange tank and 2 solid rocket boosters that would fall away after launch. NASA told Nixon this shuttle would bring costs way down, from $3 billion per Apollo mission to just $1,000 per pound of cargo. Everyone hoped it would become like an airline to space. But even inside the White House, people quietly knew those numbers were too good to be true. Then came the real struggle. In 1971 and 1972, NASA found itself stuck between 2 booster designs. One used high-pressure liquid fuel and would cost $7 billion to build, but only $100 per pound to launch things. The other, solid rocket boosters, were cheaper to build, $5.5 billion, but way more expensive to operate at $160 per pound. NASA chose the cheaper option to save $1.5 billion right away. That decision ended up playing a role in one of the worst disasters in space history. Even after that, costs exploded. By 1982, development had passed $10.6 billion. If you adjust that for inflation, NASA actually spent around $49 billion building the shuttle. The orbiter itself cost $6.25 billion. Just building the supposedly reusable solid rocket boosters cost another $582 million, even though NASA had promised they'd be used hundreds of times. The first shuttle, Columbia, started taking shape in 1975 in Palmdale, California. Rockwell International turned that quiet desert town into a high-tech hub. Columbia arrived at Kennedy Space Center in March 1979, covered in 32,000 tiny heat-resistant tiles. Each one was different. Each one had to be shaped and placed by hand. They were made of special silica that could crumble in your hand, but survive the blazing heat of re-entry, up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Columbia even had panels made of secret materials so advanced they stayed classified. When it was done, it was heavy, 2,200 pounds more than the next orbiter, Challenger. Before Columbia could fly in space, NASA needed proof the shuttle could actually glide and land. So in 1977, they ran a wild test using another shuttle, Enterprise. On August 12th, 65,000 people gathered at Edwards Air Force Base to see it. Astronauts Fred Hayes and Gordon Fullerton rode Enterprise strapped to the top of a 747 jet. At 26,000 feet, they detached and glided to the ground. It looked smooth, but it wasn't. During the last drop test on October 26th, the shuttle hit the runway hard and bounced. The vibrations showed serious flaws in how the wings behaved in air. They had to fix that, or else the next shuttle might crash. The first 3 tests used a tail cone to reduce drag, but the last 2 didn't. That made the shuttle harder to control. Still, the test proved one thing. Shuttles could glide home barely. NASA promised the shuttle would fly often, 60 times a year by 1985. That meant each orbiter had to fly 15 times a year, like a plane. But that never happened. Even the scaled-down goal of 24 flights by 1990 failed. In 1985, they only managed 9 launches, and even that pushed the system to its limits. The shuttles were aging fast. There weren't enough parts. Technicians were rushed. Safety checks were skipped. NASA still believed each shuttle could fly 100 times, but the truth was far from that. This pressure helped create the disaster that came next. Columbia finally launched on April 12, 1981. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen spent 2 days in orbit. It seemed like a success until they landed. Engineers found 16 heat tiles were gone, and 148 more were damaged. One hole was 8 inches wide. It happened because of extreme sound vibrations during launch. Hot gas even slipped through one gap and bent the landing gear door. If they had known this during the flight, they might have ejected and let Columbia crash. NASA later said the chance of a fatal accident on that first flight was 1 in 9. Today's standard for crew safety is closer to 1 in 270. Then, on January 28, 1986, Challenger lifted off and exploded just 73 seconds later. 7 astronauts were killed. A rubber O-ring in the right booster failed in the cold, causing a leak that tore the shuttle apart. The whole program stopped for 32 months. It took $2.1 billion to redesign the booster joints. NASA had planned to launch 24 times a year, but after Challenger, that number dropped to just 8. During the investigation, physicist Richard Feynman stunned everyone by showing how the O-rings froze using nothing but a clamp and a glass of ice water. NASA had known those seals were risky, but still flew. Just a month before the launch, they even removed the problem from their danger list. After Challenger, NASA promised change. They added safety systems and new reporting lines, but many old problems stayed. In 1988, NASA found cracks forming in the foam insulation of the big external tank, even before liftoff. The foam kept falling off. Engineers began treating foam damage as normal. They even built regular tile replacement into the budget. Everyone got used to it. In 2003, right after Columbia broke apart, shuttle managers still said foam probably wasn't to blame. That mindset had become a habit, and it cost lives again. Columbia flew 28 missions by 2003. One of its most famous flights was STS-93 in 1999, when it carried the Chandra X-ray Observatory into space. That payload weighed 22,753 kilograms, the heaviest shuttle load ever. But by then, Columbia was getting old. It was built with 1970s parts. Wires were brittle. Hydraulics were worn out. Metal structures had tiny fractures from all the heat and cold over the years. Engineers knew Columbia needed more care, but parts were rare, and contractors were retiring. Keeping it flight-ready was becoming nearly impossible. In the 1990s, NASA's shuttle budget lost 40% of its spending power. At the same time, the aging shuttles needed more maintenance, but money was moved to the space station instead. They deferred $1.7 billion in safety upgrades. Staff was cut by 40%. Fewer workers had to do more. Many were nearing retirement, and young replacements weren't coming in. Safety inspections were handed to outside contractors. Stress built up. Some workers skipped vacations. Training was cut. And the cracks, both in metal and in the system, got worse. Foam strikes had been happening for years. On STS-7 in 1983, a chunk of foam fell off but didn't cause damage. Engineers gave the problem a name, foam shedding, and accepted it as routine. By the time Columbia flew its final mission in 2003, foam had fallen off in over 80% of missions with camera footage. On 7 out of 72 flights, foam broke off from the bipod ramp, the exact place it would strike Columbia. NASA didn't do enough trend analysis. Some flights didn't even have proper footage to check. The problem stayed hidden in plain sight. Just before Columbia's last flight, STS-112 launched in October 2002. During that launch, a big foam chunk hit the solid rocket booster ring, leaving a dent 4 inches wide and 3 inches deep. NASA noted the hit, but didn't treat it as a serious problem. The deadline to study the issue got pushed past the next mission, and then past Columbia's too. No fixes were made. That delay turned into tragedy. NASA's workforce had been shrinking for years. From 1995 to 1999, shuttle staff dropped from 3,000 to 1,800 full-time workers. That 40% cut hit the most critical departments: mechanics, software checks, systems engineers. Older workers stayed. Younger ones didn't come. Knowledge wasn't being passed down. The people left were overworked and exhausted. In 2002, Congress warned NASA loudly. The Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel said the shuttle was in danger. Dr. Richard Blomberg told lawmakers, "I've never been this worried." Senator Bill Nelson, a former astronaut, said the same. But instead of raising the budget, Congress cut it by another 10.3% in July 2002. The White House only proposed a 3% increase, nowhere near enough to fix what needed fixing. Rick Husband was 45 years old. He was from Texas and had already flown over 3,800 hours. He had once gone to space in 1999 to help dock with the space station. In 2003, he was picked to lead one of NASA's most detailed science missions ever. It took 13 delays before Columbia finally launched on January 16, 2003, at 10:39 in the morning. For the next 16 days, Rick kept the shuttle moving in exact patterns. He had to slowly rotate it every few hours so the team could measure ozone, track dust storms, and do tests that couldn't be done if the shuttle used even a single thruster. He trained the crew to work as one unit. Before the mission, he took them into the Wyoming wilderness for a tough survival trip to help them bond. His daughter said the team became a beautiful tapestry of different people working together. William McCool was 41, and this was his very first time in space. He had been a Navy pilot and test flyer. He flew the shuttle and helped watch all the systems as the team split into 2 groups doing experiments day and night. They were flying at 173 miles above Earth, tilted at 39 degrees. On January 29th, McCool sent a message back to Earth. He said they could see the whole planet with no borders and hoped people on Earth could imagine peace the same way. He helped with some of the hardest tests, including one where they made the tiniest flames ever recorded. Those flames were just half a watt, barely there, but still real. Kalpana Chawla was the first Indian-American woman in space. She worked in the part of the shuttle called Space Hab. She focused on how cancer cells grow in zero gravity. One experiment showed something shocking. Prostate cancer cells that started out so small grew to the size of a golf ball in only 3 days. By the end of the mission, they were the size of a small fist. She also worked on fire safety, metal mixing, and even an ant farm, watching how insects change in space. Her crystal experiments showed how materials grow differently without gravity pulling on them. Her work became part of her legacy when Columbia broke apart during re-entry. Ilan Ramon was 48 and the first astronaut from Israel. He had never eaten kosher before, but asked NASA for special kosher meals on this flight. They got them from a company in Illinois that also serves Jewish troops. He brought with him a drawing made by a boy named Peter Ginz, who died in Auschwitz, and a tiny Torah scroll that had survived the camps. Ramon kept the Sabbath on Florida time, even though they saw a sunrise every 90 minutes in space. His dust storm experiment, called MEDEX, watched how sand from the Sahara affects the world's weather. He also worked on the same small flame experiments, helping create 55 flame balls in 39 tests. These proved some theories that had been waiting 15 years to be tested. Laurel Clark was 41. She was a Navy doctor and studied what happens to the human body in space. Her experiments showed that astronauts lose 1 to 2% of bone in their legs every month. That's 250 milligrams of calcium per day, much faster than Earth can replace. She found that in space, men and women lose bone at the same rate. She also grew cancer tissues that formed shapes doctors had never seen before, helping them understand how cancer spreads to bones. Other tests she helped run showed how bacteria respond to antibiotics in space and how muscle heals. They found muscles recover in 2 weeks, but bones can take 18 months to fully come back. This was key for future Mars trips, which would take 30 months. On the morning of January 16th, the shuttle finally lifted off. Just 81.7 seconds later, something terrible happened. A piece of foam from the fuel tank broke off. It was about the size of a briefcase. Cameras saw it hit the left wing and break into dust. The shuttle was going 1,500 mph at that moment. The foam hit the exact spot where special heat-protecting carbon panels were placed to guard against temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Celsius. NASA saw the video and reviewed it, but they didn't think it was serious. The foam weighed 1.67 pounds and was up to 27 inches long. It hit the wing at over 500 mPa. Tests later showed the same type of foam could punch a hole 16 by 16 inches wide. That hole meant Columbia's wing was no longer protected from re-entry heat, but no one acted. Engineers asked for satellite pictures. Managers said no. Columbia didn't have a robotic arm to check itself, and they didn't plan any emergency spacewalks. Everyone assumed foam strikes were normal. They had happened 79 times before, but none of those had ever caused this kind of hole. The crew had no idea. They kept working every day. They never knew about the foam strike. Back on Earth, managers talked and emailed about it, but they didn't tell the crew. One internal message even said maybe they shouldn't tell the astronauts at all. On the day of re-entry, the crew noticed a pink glow through the windows. It was the air heating up outside, but no one realized that hot gases were already slipping inside the broken wing, melting parts and cutting through wires. At 8:58:39 a.m., the first warning light came on. It was already too late. Even with the damage, the mission was a big success. It lasted 15 days, 22 hours, 20 minutes, and 32 seconds. They finished more than 80 experiments, including studies on fluid movement, crystals, fire, and living tissues. Ramon's Madex found important data about desert dust and even saw 14 rare flashes called sprites above storms. They sent 7.5 hours of Medex data back to Earth during the flight. That data was saved. NASA had known about foam problems for years. Foam struck the shuttle on 82% of flights, with good footage. And 30% of flights had such bad video that engineers couldn't even check for damage. There had been 7 known foam problems in one small area of the tank before Columbia, but each time, NASA just made a note and moved on. They called it in family, meaning something they'd seen before, so they treated it as normal. On January 27th, Boeing gave a slideshow to NASA about the foam damage. The title slide said everything was okay, but deep in the bullet points, it said the foam was 640 times bigger than anything they had tested. The most important warning was buried in small text where no one focused. A Yale expert later said the layout of the slide helped hide the danger. Rodney Rocha, a NASA engineer, knew they needed better images. On January 22nd, he emailed managers asking if they could beg for help from the military. The next day, he warned about grave hazards. His request was canceled in just 90 minutes. He was shocked. He even wrote a longer warning to 12 officials, but never sent it because of pressure from above. NASA had gotten used to foam strikes since the first shuttle flight in 1981. Over time, they started seeing them as no big deal. They changed labels from problems to maintenance. After Columbia was lost, the program manager still said he didn't think foam was the reason. 7 bipod ramp foam strikes had happened before, but they were all treated like nothing. While people on the ground were arguing, the astronauts kept working. David Brown filmed videos of Earth. The team ran more experiments. The debris assessment team grew to 30 people, more than the Challenger decision team in 1986. Some at NASA considered 2 options: patching the wing with metal and frozen water bags, or sending Atlantis to rescue them by February 10th. For a rescue, Atlantis would fly with 4 people and meet Columbia before February 15th, when its air filters would stop working. But neither plan was ever started. It all started at 8:44 in the morning. On February 1st, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia was 400,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, traveling faster than 17,000 miles per hour, about 25 times the speed of sound. That's when it hit the upper part of Earth's atmosphere. From the outside, everything looked normal. But inside the shuttle, small sensors in the left wing had already started showing something strange. They were picking up more strain than usual, but nobody on the ground or in the cockpit saw those warnings in time. 4 minutes later, at 8:48, those numbers in the left wing became worse than anything recorded in past missions. The shuttle's flight system noticed the difference too. It started making tiny automatic corrections to stay steady. Just before 8:53, something was seen falling off the shuttle from the sky over California. That was the first clear sign that something was going wrong. What nobody knew yet was that the heat shields had already been damaged. By 8:58, Columbia had reached the skies over Texas. The first heat tile had fallen off near a town called Littlefield. Just 1 minute later, at 8:59, the situation became deadly. Superheated gas, hotter than 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, entered a small hole in the left wing. The aluminum inside the wing couldn't survive that kind of heat. It began to melt and bend. The metal supports broke apart. Wires were cut. Hydraulic fluid boiled. The wing twisted away from the body. The shuttle lost control. By 9:18, the entire structure came apart mid-air. People on the ground saw bright streaks flying across the sky. Some thought it was fireworks. Others heard loud booms, strong enough to shake walls and rattle windows. The first pieces of debris fell near Lubbock, Texas. Some saw flashes over Dallas. The pieces broke off in different directions, creating trails that stretched across 2,000 square miles, from West Texas all the way to Louisiana. Even FBI agents who were off-duty noticed. One of them, Brent Chambers, was about to mow his lawn near Dallas when he heard the boom at 8 a.m. Central Time. That sound carried all the way through East Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. There were over 2,000 pieces scattered across those states, some as far apart as Littlefield and Fort Polk. When they started gathering the wreckage, they found nearly 85,000 pounds of parts, just 40% of Columbia's total mass. Inside the cockpit, the crew was still alive, at least for a few moments. Commander Rick Husband's last words were heard at 9:18 a.m. He said, "Roger, and then nothing." That last message came as the computer was warning about strange tire pressure readings. After that, radio went silent, but for 32 more seconds, data was still being sent down. It showed that many of the shuttle's systems were still working, even as the rest of the shuttle was falling apart. The crew cabin held together a little longer than the rest of the shuttle. That gave the astronauts just seconds, about 40, to process what was happening. At 207,000 feet above the ground, the cabin suddenly lost all pressure. That moment happened at exactly 13:59:32 GMT. The pressure drop was so fast, no human body could react in time. Some didn't have helmets on. Others had visors open. 3 weren't even wearing gloves. Without full suit protection, they couldn't survive the sudden vacuum. They lost consciousness before they could fix anything. The air inside their lungs started boiling. Their blood formed bubbles. This effect, called ebulism, is what happens when fluids in the body are exposed to near zero pressure. It happened to all 7 crew members. Then came the final blow. As the front of the shuttle broke off and started spinning, the astronauts were tossed around violently. The seat belts didn't lock. The upper straps snapped. Some of the helmets weren't on properly. The astronauts were hit hard inside the cabin. The force reached 18 times normal gravity. It wasn't survivable. Later, NASA found footage from inside the shuttle. It had been recorded up to 13:48 GMT, just 4 minutes before things started failing. In that video, the crew was calm, talking, checking controls, looking out windows. They had no idea what was coming. After the accident, NASA's recovery effort became the biggest search mission in U.S. history. Over 25,000 people from 270 organizations searched more than 2 million acres. The pieces they recovered helped explain what had gone wrong. A piece of the left wing, with signs of impact, gave them a clue that something had hit the shuttle at launch. That was the key: the foam. A piece of insulation had broken off the fuel tank just 81 seconds after launch. It slammed into the left wing at 500 miles per hour. That created the hole that let the plasma in. But NASA didn't act on it. They saw the foam strike but thought it was harmless. They didn't use satellites to get a better look. They didn't do a spacewalk to inspect the wing. They didn't tell the crew. And here's where it gets worse. NASA could have launched Atlantis. If they had started on flight day 4, Atlantis could have launched by February 10th with a crew of 4. They would have had 5 days to get there. Columbia could have stayed in orbit until February 15th. If everything was rationed: oxygen, food, water, carbon dioxide filters, it would have been the hardest mission in space history. But it was possible. There was even a rough repair idea. They could have used metal parts from inside Columbia and sealed the hole with ice bags frozen in space. It was high risk and maybe wouldn't work, but it was something. Still, NASA didn't try. Not because they couldn't, because they didn't believe it was needed. Some officials even talked about whether it was better not to tell the crew. Some thought it would be cruel to let them know they might die. They debated whether to let them enjoy their mission without fear. But the truth was, they didn't push hard enough to even confirm there was a problem. Engineers raised concerns, but they were ignored. Management didn't want delays. That silence cost 7 lives. The final report came out on August 26, 2003. It had 29 recommendations. It said NASA had grown used to foam strikes. They saw them as normal. That was the real cause, not just the foam, but the culture. It forced changes. NASA grounded the fleet until 2005. They rebuilt their inspection systems. They redesigned the external tanks. But the truth is, the same problems still exist in parts of the space world today. Even in 2025, SpaceX's tests with Starship were breaking apart and sending debris over the Caribbean. New companies rushed testing, while old lessons faded. Some of NASA's own former astronauts warned that the safety culture they tried to fix after Columbia might be slipping again. But the names of Columbia's crew live on. NASA named 7 asteroids after them. They named hills on Mars for them. They put a memorial on the Moon and built a learning center in California. The video from their last hours still exists. Their suits are gone. Their shuttle is gone. But their names remain. Rick, William, Michael, Kalpana, David, Laurel, Elon. They didn't survive, but they changed space forever.